Did you know that as of 2019, Black Americans only accounted for 7% of tech jobs in the US? Or even more, that women only made up 27% of workers in STEM fields? In this episode, we are talking about all things tech and STEM and diversity, or in this case, lack thereof. Welcome to Higher Ed Next. In this episode, we're talking about all things tech and STEM and diversity, or in this case, lack thereof. Men hold 75% of US tech jobs and are offered 3% higher salaries than women. Additionally, between 2014 and 2021, the industry produced only a 1% increase in Black representation within technical roles at large tech companies. In a word, yikes. During this interview, I sit down with professionals and experts in the tech space who are creating pathways for women, BIPOC, and LGBTQ students pursuing careers in tech, and I ask, what will the future of tech look like? Without further ado, here's our conversation. Pleasure to have you both here today. Nakeya Adams, a senior at New York University and president of the National Society of Black Engineers, as well as Dennis Schultz, who is the executive director of the Blacks in Technology Foundation. Nakeya and Dennis, it is lovely to meet you both and have you here for this timely conversation on diversity in technology.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. And I think it's great, especially considering the different perspectives you both are coming from. Dennis, you being firmly within the tech and corporate space, and Nakeya, you going into a career in tech and understanding what's coming up for you and your experiences and what you think would be helpful in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion in technology. Without further ado, Nakeya, my first question for you is, what inspired you to pursue a degree in computer science? And specifically, what made you ultimately choose to study at the Tandon School of Engineering at New York University? Very, very prominent.
Thank you. So in terms of what made me decide to study computer science, I had been introduced to STEM and tech at a very young age, say around like 8-10 years old. My uncle on my mother's side, my mom's brother, is a engineer, and he studied computer engineering in college and got his degree in CE. So he had introduced my cousin and I to different softwares that we could use for fun. So the first software that I used was Scratch. So I basically created little programs with it just for fun, nothing really serious. And then as I got older, there was this program called Wild House Engineering. And the whole purpose of that program was to introduce young girls into the STEM fields. So there were a bunch of different workshops, for instance, the Vex robots and just different building workshops that introduce girls to the STEM field in general. So the first time I had went, which was in middle school, I was very excited about it. So I've always just been introduced to building different things, and that sparked my interest. So explaining that to my mom, who's a very involving part of me coming this far, she actually found a computer programming nonprofit organization that teaches kids in elementary to high school beginner level of coding through different languages such as HTML, JavaScript, Python, etc. So as I've gone through that, I ended up being able to volunteer and then working there. And then I got to high school and with all the classes that I took, specifically AP Computer Science principles, it reinforced me wanting to learn STEM and go into the STEM field, specifically software engineering. So in terms of why did I choose Tandon, Tandon has a really good diverse group of students that go here. So everywhere you walk around, it's a lot of diversity, even in the classroom. So I was just really impressed with the overall makeup of the student body at Tandon. And then I also was pretty interested in the CS curriculum, specifically the courses that they offered that allowed me to, one, concentrate on the specific side of computer science that I want, but also explore different fields outside of computer science. So it allowed me to get a well-rounded perspective within the field. And then I was also pretty interested in how NYU's specific engineering program, how they also had different ways for you to connect with the school within the major to get a better understanding of how the field works by different workshops, specifically for students of colors, to talk with the faculty members at the school who are students of color to get their experience. So just from seeing how they really advocate for women and students of color to come here and the support network that was here, it drew me to coming here.
Well, first of all, that is beautiful. That it sounds like you grew up in a family of folks who had an interest in science and engineering. I'm trying to recount a moment where I learned coding during my middle and high school years, and honestly, I was grateful just to pass my science classes because I went the education route. Not for me necessarily. However, I did do an internship at New York University. Way, I think about 10 years at this point. And it's a beautiful campus, extremely diverse, as you were saying before. So I can only imagine what your experience has been like thus far there.
Yeah.
So awesome. Dennis, so although you're here today having a conversation with me on behalf of Blacks in Technology, you also have many additional accolades to your name, including working as a customer success account manager at Microsoft, and you also, I believe, founded your own company. Hope I say this right, Paparazzi, in 2020. So I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit more about what inspired you to enter the tech space and how you navigated your own career path in STEM?
Sure. So I guess for context and scale, I'll tell folks that I'm probably double Nakeya's age plus a few. So I'm a
We
little
love,
bit.
we love the breadth. We love the breadth of experiences here. Yes.
So I'm a little more seasoned. But with that said, I started out in around the same age. So I think I was like around third, fourth grade, and I was a video game, junkie. At
Yeah.
that time, the game of the day was the Atari 2600, joystick, paddles, big
Yeah.
block cartridges, if you aren't of the era.
You gotta like the ones where you gotta like blow on the cartridge and then like yeah, I get
Yes,
you.
indeed. Yes, indeed. So I started off just like liking video games and wanting to be a video game designer because that was the only real technology that I saw. And then I saw in, I think it was a magazine or a commercial for a personal computer. And this computer was the Commodore VIC-20. And it was affordable enough for my parents to get, but my mother didn't see the purpose in getting a computer. So I got a job to sell newspapers so I could save up money in order to get me a computer.
I know that's right. I know that's right.
So the deal I had with my mother was, if I get half, would you come in with the other half? So she said yes, and I ended up playing around with it. It came with a little book that taught you BASIC. BASIC was a computer language, and I learned how to program in BASIC. Just reading through and doing the examples in the book. So I upgraded the next year from my VIC-20, which had a tape recorder as my storage device. Cassette tapes, you play record like a tape recorder, and that's how I store my programs. Upgraded to a Commodore, which I could actually store on floppy disks, which really floppy, 5 1/4. And then I found other people in the neighborhood who also had computers, and they had games. And I learned how to hack the software in order to copy games for my computer. So that's kind of really where the bug, took shape. And, late elementary school into, middle school into high school, I was just a computer nerd. I was always tinkering around, always making programs, always finding somebody that I could share games with or trade games with. Making one-sided floppy disks and a two-sided floppy disk with a hole puncture. I mean, it's like real hacky stuff for, a preteen. But then when I got into high school, I realized that, I might want to do this like as a career. And I wasn't sure what to do. Everybody was talking about being an engineer. So I was like, okay, well, I don't know what an engineer is, but I do like science and I do like, computers. Not too fond of the math part of STEM, but I was like, I'll work with that. So I
Can't have
ended
it
up,
all. You can't have it all, you
you
know.
know, I, and there
Uh,
was a program there. You mentioned NASA, Nakia, and there was a program in Virginia where I went to high school, which was at NASA Langley, and it was basically an introduction to aeronautical science, aerospace engineering, and I did that program. I was like, okay, this is cool. I thought I was going to be a rocket propulsion engineer, and then when I got into college, I realized that calculus is really hard. I didn't like I didn't like it. I was like, I can't see myself doing this for, the rest of my life. I was like, I gotta be able to do computers without this portion of it. If I have to do calculus every day, I'm gonna be, not a happy dude at the end of it. So, like Cobretti, I ended up going the education route. I was like, well, I can teach technology, and I went into technology education thinking I was going to be a teacher. And then I realized how much teachers actually make. And I was like, I was like, maybe there's another way that I can do this thing.
that's a whole other interview. That's way, but yes, yes.
Yes. So I ended up taking those talents and pivoting my love for technology and my personality into a tech sales role, and that's where I ended up. Leveraging my experiences, IT sales, working for major corporations.
I was honestly, I mean, we've had a few conversations. I was not expecting the wide variety of like different roles that you've had going into your career, but I also think that that's a testament to, I think, the industry in and of itself. I think you can take a very traditional pathway, pursuing a computer science degree, or an information technology certification or program, but you can also like take a lot of pivots to get into the path. If you're truly interested in technology, it's not all people, I think, on a whiteboard like writing down math problems. Like there's a lot of different ways of coming at this particular industry. So exciting to hear, and I hope that that resonates with folks in terms of like there's more than one way that you can enter this particular career field. So back to you, Nakeya. As I prep for this interview, I learned a lot about your background, as you mentioned, in South Florida, in Palm Bay, and your NASA, as well as you spoke a little bit about some of the resources, or I should say, lack thereof, that you had as a woman of color pursuing STEM. And I think that you've had some opportunities there, but I'm curious to hear if you could speak a little bit more about some of the challenges you encountered, and how they impacted your academic career interests and career pursuits. In particular, I'm curious, did it make you go even harder and say like, yes, I'm going into STEM. I don't care what anyone says. Or, did you have moments where you considered maybe I should pivot? Maybe I should do a different degree, a different major. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I will definitely say that my journey throughout STEM, it has not been easy, and it'll definitely not continue to be easy. I will say, when I got to college and really was in the environment of one being the student and then being taught by a professor, it was a very different environment than being in high school. You, as a college student, you have to really put yourself more than you can even imagine and do the unthinkable in order to pursue the goals that you want. And I think another important thing that I continue to work on and realize is that your mindset is the most important part of this process. Sometimes the imposter syndrome can creep in and cause you to think, can I actually do this? And I've had that all throughout college, and I still to this day have it when I'm in college. The imposter syndrome, it'll creep in. I'll always think, can I actually do this? This is really hard. How am I going to be able to get through this? And then, I just have to sit and think to myself that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And just from how I've been able to get this far, especially in this major, especially at a hard school like NYU, it's helped to put in that perspective, that I'm able to actually do it. And growing up in a town where I didn't really see a lot of people like me was different in my immediate surroundings, not being able to see specifically people of color who have worked in the field. But luckily, since my mother worked for an aeronautical company, and she worked with engineers, so she was able to expose me to some of her coworkers, specifically her coworkers that identified as women and or identified as people of color. So she had me talk with them about their experience working in the STEM field, and that helped to reinforce that this is what I wanted to do. And then by the time, I got to college, I definitely had more diversity within seeing different students that looked like me, and then other students of color, and then other students who identify within the same gender as me. Like just being able to see that there are people who are interested in the same fields that I'm in. And I will say, growing up in a small town, it was very hard to have different programs to be able to get that exposure to the STEM field. I would say it's a lot easier for urban kids to get that exposure since there's so much, there's more of them and there's a lot more to do than there is for kids like me who grew up in the suburbs. And it's not our fault, that we couldn't get that exposure. It's just a matter of, where you grew up, and if that specific, industry is very popular where you are living, that impacts the level of exposure that you have. But in my case, since it was different, that I literally had someone in my family who worked within the field, and then my mother worked with people who were around the field, that helped me to get the exposure as young as I did.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to your mom. Like, let's
Yeah.
just take like a quick moment to be like, shout out to her, because honestly, like, there's a lot of students who don't have that opportunity to really access folks who look like them, who represent their social identities, that are in a field that is honestly still lacking in terms of diversity, or as we have seen lately. So shout out to her for doing the work, and knowing what you needed to get you the support to pursue your own career goals. I'd love to jump off of Dennis, if you don't mind. I'd love to jump off of a little bit of what Nakeya said about imposter syndrome, because I would say, I think for someone like me, who at this point I've went as far as I can in terms of my educational pursuits, as well as within research and academia, and being in this space now, I think I also still encounter imposter syndrome. So I can only imagine what the case looks like for even seasoned professionals, right? So I'm curious for you, how have you encountered imposter syndrome, if at all, and how have you navigated that throughout your own career?
Yeah, well, it still exists. It won't go away. Unfortunately, Nakeya, you will have a long battle with imposter syndrome, because there's always going to be somebody who's perceived to be either smarter or more experienced, or just more polished. And in my case, I've been either the only Black person in the room, or the youngest person in the room, or the most inexperienced person in the room. And when you're navigating your personal career trajectory, you're trying to figure out, okay, what is my next step? Where do I go? How do I get to the next level? You're going to run into situations that make you question, if you are good enough to be where you are, or if you are going to, have a long-standing career doing what you think you want to do. As far as the way I've navigated is, I think the first thing is to recognize it, right? It's a lot of there was a lot of time before imposter syndrome was a term that I just I was going through it and didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to articulate it. I kind of felt it, but, and I was at a conference and somebody said imposter syndrome. Oh, that's what that is. That's what I've been feeling all those years. But really for me, it's just assessing what I know I can do well, knowing myself and knowing where I want to go. And I think to combat imposter syndrome, it's really just studying and knowing your craft, whatever that is. If you're a software engineer, try to be the best software engineer you can be, study, know what you think you should know. And when those situations come up where you don't know, it's okay to not know and find the answer. That's what most people do anyway. So for me, that was the first thing. Okay, just get good. Second thing is, for those people who you put on a pedestal, talk to them, and you'll realize that they have the same challenges that you have, and they feel the same way that you do. That'll give you a lot more confidence going in, because there was this one guy. He was what I consider the epitome of sales engineers. He was always had a good answer. Customers liked him. He was really smooth and seemed to have it all together. And one day I was talking to him and I was asking him, I was like, so what is it that you do that I could do to make me more like you? And he was like, I was going to ask you the same thing. So,
plot twist. Gotcha.
Yeah, he was going through a lot of the same issues that I was, and, looking at me to, take some tips and tools from. And I just think that just goes to show that even the people who you think have it all together are still trying to figure it out. And in IT specifically, it's all about trial and error. Problem solving is not a, direct linear path. You kind of go up and down and around about in order to get to the resolution sometimes. But if you can find those people that you can lean on and, know that, hey, if you need help, you can get help and you don't have to have all the answers, I think that'll go a long way in combating that imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, solid advice. And I think, again, I think being in a tech field where at least as an outsider looking in, I feel like a lot of it is just problem solving, like having an idea, creating a way of executing, and then if things go right, great. Or just finding a way to like continuously improve the process or the product, which I think again is comforting, because I think we all, no matter what field that we're in, we're always like continuously wanting to improve the process or improve ourselves to be better. So thank you for that sound advice, Dennis. I'm gonna kick it back to you. I'm just gonna keep asking you a bunch of questions, but kind of to tangent away from that, you have been the executive director for the Blacks in Technology Foundation since about 2020, if I'm correct. An organization that was originally founded by Gregory Greenlee, in 2008. Can you speak more to, and I think this built on a lot of what you've been talking about so far, can you speak more to why this organization was founded and the mission that it serves in the tech space today?
Sure. So, yeah, and I guess I'll give you a little history. So in 2008, Greg Greenlee, the founder, he's out of Cincinnati, Ohio area. And he went to a tech conference and was wondering why there weren't more Black people at the conference. And, when he got back from the conference, he decided that he was going to get his friends together and, basically make sure that there was representation at these tech conferences. So he, started a community, a handful of folks getting together to just, talk tech stuff. And, when there was a time to get together that, our faces were represented. That's kind of how it started. The community grew kind of word of mouth, organically, and then online over the next, 5 to 10 years. And eventually somebody said we should have our own conference. And in 2017, Greg decided, okay, let's do it. He said he never ran a conference before, never did anything like that, but he was like, if they want it, let's do it. So a couple hundred folks got together and they had their first conference in Minneapolis. And at that time, we stood up the nonprofit organization in order to take corporate donations to help fund the conference initially. And that was how the Blacks in Technology Foundation was born. So since then, we took the conference model, and we've had conferences for the last 4 out of 5 years. We skipped COVID 2 years ago, and we did a virtual conference last year. This year, we're going to be at Disney World next week, incidentally. So the conference is grown, but the foundation, the organization, kind of blossomed and evolved as well. So instead of just being a vehicle for the conference, we have programs and initiatives that support Black people globally. So anyone from African descent can join the Blacks in Technology community for free. We provide mentorship. We provide grants and scholarships for upskilling and training. We have over 40 different point programs that include apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs. We have just about every specialization. So from cybersecurity and UX design to digital marketing and web development, you name it, we've got it. We work with all the big tech firms and brands. So your Googles and Metas and Amazons and Microsofts of the world. We work with all those folks and then some. So we want to make it so if you are Black and work either in a technology role at your company or at a tech company in a non-tech role like a recruiter or sales or marketing, that you have a place and you have a community that can support you. So if Nakeya, when you are looking for your first job, you're looking for referrals, come to Blacks in Tech. We can pair you with somebody who could be a mentor or go into our Slack community. It has over 8,500 people right now. You say, hey, does anybody work here? How is it? How do I get in the door? Who do I talk to? You know, those types of questions that some people don't have the local community to support. We try to provide that externally for, especially people in marginalized areas like, the Deep South or folks in urban areas who just don't have those resources at the ready to, kind of give them an onboard into tech.
That's beautiful. And I was just gonna say, like, Dennis, slide that business card over to Nakeya, because again, I think that you obviously are a leader of a really great organization that provides a lot of support and resources that I think and I think given the space of upcoming Black students and new Black professionals that are coming into the tech space, like having an organization like yours is important. If nothing else, to create the opportunity and the resources that a person needs to succeed today. So kudos again.
And one other thing, if I can mention, because I'd be remiss if I didn't. So we do partner with National Society of Black Engineers. So NSB is a partner as far as collaboration wise. And the CEO of NSB is going to be speaking at our conference next week. So there's a little bit of tie in there too. So we try to, pull all the different disparate Black tech organizations together under our umbrella.
That's awesome. Dennis, I'm actually going to piggyback off of what you mentioned about the National Society of Black Engineers, because we are currently in the midst of the president of the National Society of Black Engineers at NYU, Nakeya Adams. Nakeya, it would be great if I could hear a bit about what drew you to get involved in this organization on your campus, and what impact do you hope to have as a leader among Black students pursuing future careers in STEM?
I actually heard about NSB in high school because of my mother, who heard about it from my uncle.
Coming back to the mom again.
There's the parent involvement right there. Interesting enough, she's not even an engineer. She's not even an engineer. She works for human resources.
Yes.
Moving on from that. I signed up to be a NSB junior member when I was in high school. However, in my area, there wasn't an active chapter. So my nearest active chapter was either in Orlando, which was an hour away, or Miami, which was 2.5 hours away from where I lived. So it's not really accessible for me to be involved within an SB junior chapter. Plus, I was busy with other extracurriculars in high school, so I never really thought enough to be as serious as being involved in SB. Plus, I didn't have that opportunity within me in proximity. However, when I got to college, I saw that NYU had a NSBE chapter, and I've been on the e-board since I was a freshman. So my freshman year, I was just sitting through the meetings, watching the officers conduct the meetings. So I was pretty much just like in like the committees, I guess you could say. And then my sophomore year, I was the communications chair. So I was in charge of our NYU NSBE Instagram and other social media pages. Follow us at NYU NSBE, by the way, so you can see what we're up to. And I would create flyers as well for any of the different events that we've had. And then my junior year, I was a technical excellence chair. So part of that role, I was involved in conducting different professional development workshops, such as building a resume, coaching people through how to build their cover letters, how to craft an elevator pitch when they're talking to recruiters, etc. And then this year, now I'm the president for NYU NSBE, and I decided to fulfill the role this year simply because of the fact that NSBE has had a huge impact in my life in college, and of course with my other friends as well. That's how I met a lot of Black students on my campus, because that was something that I was very intentional about doing when I first got into college. So, Tandon having the NSBE chapter on campus was very helpful, which gave me the opportunity to get to know other Black students on campus. And then also just from seeing how just from attending the different conferences like nationals and the Fall Regional Conference, also known as FRC, just seeing how all the Black excellence around me, that's where I thrive. Just from seeing Black people being successful, meeting other Black people, hearing about other Black people's experiences, and just simply providing myself with a network of people that look like me, so that way I can have the opportunity to connect with others and have other people I can talk to that can relate to the certain experiences that I have. And in terms of what do I want to provide for students on campus, being the president for NSBE, I want to provide, the students here at Tandon, and then plus, since the engineering schools in Brooklyn, we also have the students in the Manhattan campus, what we also call main campus. There's also STEM majors over there. So we have this year a lot of them coming over wanting to be involved with NSBE, and it's just really great to see. And that increases the number of Black kids that, I see on the daily. And just from being able to be that person and providing the activities for them to get to know other Black students on campus has just been really enriching and fulfilling for me to see. And I also want to provide the students, with my experience, especially with my other board members, with their experiences as well in the professional development, helping them to amplify that so that way they can be successful once they graduate from college. And then to also provide them with the network of meeting other Black students, because, sometimes it can get very lonely when you're the only one. And it's just very important for NSBE to reinforce that level of community within our school.
I agree. I mean, I think it's the old saying of it takes a village, especially if you are in a space where you're underrepresented, community is absolutely important, if nothing else, to be able to look across the table and say, hey, I hear what you're saying. I know what you're going through. So glad that you're in a space where you're wanting to provide that, in a space to provide that, and willing to take on the leadership to create that space for Black students. I'd love to get a conversation, if possible, going between us about, because I think a lot of the themes of what we're talking about today is focusing a lot on leadership and mentorship and representation. And I think based on the recent statistics by the Pew Research Center, as well as Google, and their recent diversity report, not only are Black people underrepresented in STEM, but there's also a lack or a dearth of leadership among Black professionals in the tech space today. Even with very wonderful organizations like Blacks in Technology Foundation, there's still that lack. I think given this information, how can representation and mentorship change this narrative of underrepresentation, and how can we push the needle a bit more?
So for me, I mean, we look at mentorship in a couple of different ways. When I say we, the Blacks in Technology community. So there are formal and informal mentors, and Wendy Williams had a saying, she would be a friend in my head. So we have mentors in our head. People that don't know they're mentors, but could be mentors to you. And the thing is, when you think of mentorship, in general, you have to really define it, because there are coaches, people who will, be more practical and, provide, you with tactical advice on specific things that you can do. And then there are people who are like guardians, people who are like, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to make sure you're good, and there's a difference. And sometimes you want a guardian, but you end up with a coach. So you kind of have to put a team of mentors together to do what it is that you ultimately want to accomplish. That's been my personal experience. I haven't really, looked at somebody and says, hey, you're going to be my mentor. You're going to mentor me, or I'm going to, be your mentee, and, we'll check in on a regular basis. Now, that said, we have programs specifically for mentorship within our organization. So we have one that's dedicated specifically for college students, where you will get paired with a mentor, somebody who is in the same career path as you. And it's global. It's called the Global Mentorship Initiative, and we have a partnership with that organization. And then we also have a mentorship program for in-career professionals called Converge. So once you actually land a job and you need some support, we pair you with someone who's in that same career trajectory as well. But this is really peer-to-peer mentoring, if you will. Somebody who's maybe a couple of rungs up the ladder on where you want to be. And that's called Converge. And those are 6-month cohort programs. We feel that the structure of those programs kind of get people into the mindset of either being mentored or becoming a mentor themselves. And then you can do those informal things like reach out on LinkedIn or find people, who you've read about in, different articles, and reach out to them and ask them specific questions and advice, and include them in your network of people to help you be a more well-rounded person, and ultimately a successful career, lifelong learner, and someone who's going to advance their career based on the advice of others and not repeat the mistakes of the past from other people. So all that to say, and I know I gave a long-winded answer. All that to say is, your mentorship journey, your mentorship path is going to be customized, and you should take the time to really figure out what works best for you. If it's going to be somebody who's going to provide those tactical points of advice, or somebody who's going to be more of a soft skills, guardian type person.
Nakeya, what are your thoughts?
Wow. One, I didn't really look at it in that way of mentorship being looked at in, different lenses. I will say also to, add on to what Dennis said, I also think from a younger generations perspective, I think in terms of people providing young Black students with the opportunity to be exposed to STEM would really help the lack of underrepresentation. Black students normally are not pushed to studying STEM, and I think that's first off where the problem starts. Without this exposure to these specific group of students, we're never going to have the representation that we want to see within Black people in tech. So that's the first thing I would say that needs to change. Second, it also depends on the geographical location of where these students are. Your urban kids, they have more access to all these different programs that are geared towards towards high school kids specifically in the urban areas to get the exposure to different STEM. There's also different technical schools. Like I know in New York City, there's Brooklyn Tech. So that specific school is a technical school that allows, students to get that exposure. to tech. But in the suburban areas, especially in the deep south, a lot of the people who live in these areas, there's not a lot of programs out there for kids in the suburbs to be able to have this level of exposure to STEM, even within the school systems and curriculums as well. So I feel like if there's a beginning level of exposure, it doesn't have to necessarily be when they're in high school. It could be even younger than that. It'll start to get these kids learning, how they could potentially see themselves within the field of STEM. It doesn't necessarily have to be engineering, but it could be, a scientist, a chemist, a doctor, especially since, in the medical field, there's not that many Black doctors there, and we need more of them to help, advocate for the health of Black people, given the system that we live in society where a lot of the odds are stacked against us as a people. So I just think with that level of exposure to these kids at a young age, it'll help them, it'll get the light bulb in their heads going to be able to, pursue this field. And I also think in terms of in the tech field, when it comes to the corporate world and even in the classrooms, seeing Black professionals, there's also a lack of that as well. So not only is there a lack of Black students within the classroom, there's also a lack of Black people within the staff of these different, places. So if we all had more of that exposure, eventually over time, more Black people will want to gravitate towards tech, have a career in tech, even if it involves teaching students in tech. Young Black children, like myself from when I was younger, if I were to have someone who looked like me in that setting, it would be even more helpful than it already is now to see that I could potentially, make a career and study within this field.
Nakeya, you brought up a really good point about it's not just in the classroom, it's also in companies and organizations. And while the Metas and the Googles and the Alphabets and all of these really powerful tech companies are great, they have their issues for certain. And there's a part in what you said that I would love to hear Dennis respond to in terms of wanting to see Black representation within tech companies and within these larger organizations that focus on tech. What's your response to that as someone who's been in this space for a while? And it sounds like Nakeya has a really great perspective and a very valid perspective with stats to match there. I'd be curious to hear more about what you think about this issue as of right now.
Yeah, and it's spot on. I think the last research report that I saw, we were Black people in big tech companies were about 4% of the total employee population, which and it's even smaller for tech roles within those organizations. So you think of a company like Amazon, they may have larger diversity numbers, but a lot of those workers aren't in skilled technical roles. They're going to be warehouse workers, et cetera. So when we, as an organization, try to figure out, okay, where do we focus? Where can we provide influence? And what are we really trying to change? It's really that. We want to see, people who look like us in places that we traditionally aren't. And that is the technical positions as well as the management positions, ultimately the senior leadership, executive leadership, and board roles. If we can figure out how to get companies to pay attention to diversity, I think that's probably a best place to start and apply pressure. There's not much that you can do to a multi-billion-dollar multinational organization to scare them into hiring more Black people. It just isn't. So you have to come at it a different way. So you have to say, okay, well, it's going to make you a stronger and more profitable organization by hiring diverse talent. And it's true. And there are stats to prove it. So by promoting, highlighting, providing a space for Black talent, which is what our conference does, by the way. One of the things that we do is try to highlight, that Black tech excellence from people who traditionally don't have a platform on a large scale. So people can see that, okay, they're not so scary. They actually talk the language that we need them to talk, and they can do the things that we need them to do at a high level and consistently. So I think just being visible, being present, having people share their stories, having people share their expertise is something that's going to hopefully gain traction, gain visibility with some of the higher ups at some of these tech companies who understand that there's a problem with diversity but don't know how to solve it.
That actually brings me to the last question that I have for you both. I think, obviously, and Nakeya, feel free to expound on this if there's something, you spoke a lot about what companies can do to promote diversity and inclusion. If there's more to say there, feel free to say it at this moment as well. But I'm also curious, what can colleges and universities do to promote diversity and inclusion for students in STEM? Anything else beyond, I think that some have scholarships, I think some have programs and services and resources that they provide to BIPOC students, LGBTQ students, students with disabilities. But I'm curious if there's anything else that can be done that colleges and universities can learn from, both from Nakeya, your perspective as a student, and Dennis, your perspective as you see new professionals and recent graduates come through the pipeline.
I think the one answer that I have off, the top of my head is just to, again, continue to have these conversations. I think as of recently, especially since I've almost have completed 4 years of college, the idea of diversity and inclusion hadn't been really, well, it's always been enforced, but there's been more conversation happening, especially after 2020 with everything that happened with the riots and all the racial tensions that were within the country. So I think simply just giving, people of color, especially Black people, a opportunity to be able to have the conversation about their experiences and actually to to do the learning on their own instead of just relying on Black people and other people of color to tell them about their experiences, that they should take the time themselves to learn about what it's like to be us instead of just going according to one person's experience, because one person doesn't make the overall experience of an entire group of people. You have to get a diverse perspectives in order to fully understand, okay, what can we do to bring and promote diversity and inclusion to our schools. So besides having the conversation and putting it out there and saying this is what we're doing and stuff like that, to take a look within the college and universities itself and say, how is our overall makeup and the actions that we've done within the past few years contributed to not promoting that?
That was good. I was waiting for the mic drop. But I think as far as colleges and universities, what they can do, I look back at, my experience going to Virginia Tech, and for me, it was, I was not the first person in my family to go to college, but I was one of very few to, go to a 4-year university. And I didn't have anybody to kind of guide me on that path. I kind of I want to go to college, and I kind of tried to figure it out myself. I didn't really have a supportive guidance counselor. My mother was good. My father, they both attended some college, but, they didn't really know what to expect or, what the financial aid packages were. And so I kind of stumbled through a lot of that. And I think, it's not necessarily a race thing, but I do notice that the other students that I was in class with, other Black students, had similar experiences. They, went through, Upward Bound or, other programs that kind of did college prep, but didn't really get into the details of what it's like to, get into college, make it through, and graduate and start a career. So more exposure to people who can provide that guidance, outside of just the high school guidance counselor at the high school level, I think would be helpful. Colleges that do outreach to specific students and communities and high schools that are in minority communities, I think that would be nice. We can have a whole nother conversation around the cost of college and, doing something like that to specifically address disproportionate needs of people of color versus other populations. So
Yeah.
there's a lot that I think universities can do. And again, like the, private industry corporations, what's going to be the motivating factor? Why? What's the why for them to care? I guess is the question. I think that's where people like us can raise our voice, provide pressure. As college students, Nakeya, you're a NSBE president. You can ask those tough questions to the administration at NYU. Why is tuition so high? And how can we lower it for people of color?
Yeah, what I do know is that NYU, that's a pretty penny, that's for sure, for even just for the average student.
Definitely agree on that. Especially every single year, tuition gets increased.
Yeah. Yes.
I've never heard tuition going down, year over year.
Right.
Does that happen anywhere? I've never heard of it. But
No, never. It doesn't exist. It always goes up.
Yeah, I think back to what you were saying, Dennis, it is really important for college and universities to dig in and hone in on the reason why they're trying to do this. Do they want to see something truly different, or what's the real story? To get that representation of Black people in their classrooms, in their staff.
Yeah, I've actually thought about this a lot, and what I've seen, or at least it seems like there's been more focus and emphasis on HBCUs, and I love that. I love that HBCUs are starting to get some shine and some respect. As a person who went to PWI, like NYU, I think that there's definitely some room for those institutions to, say, hey, we are struggling with diversity. We need to do more, and to actually do more, as opposed to, foregoing the predominantly white institutions and saying, hey, you know what, if you're Black, you should probably look at a HBCU just because. I think that there's room for improvement on both. My gripe or complaint with HBCUs is that not enough of them have computer science departments. And we can have another conversation about that. And then, the accreditations that go with it, there's definitely room for improvement for Black STEM, learners on both sides of the fence. So I don't know if there's any statement or, answering there.
I mean, y'all went in. It started with like, just one thing. And then it just ended up being a laundry list. But I think, to what both of you were saying, those are just a large macro issues that I think colleges need to be cognizant of. One being college affordability. We cannot say it is affordable for the average student to attend college these days, particularly if you're in a program that has a higher tuition rate. And I think accreditation is important. I think just having the program is necessary, right? I think so. Actually, HBCUs are enrolling STEM students at a higher rate than PWIs. But as you're saying, if there's not even that degree, if there's not the resources to support those students, then what is it all for, right? So then it comes back to what Nakeya was saying of like, why are we doing this? And if we're doing this, like, let's be intentional about it and let's mean what we say when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So obviously this is not going to get solved today, but I think that this all brings up a lot of really important points that I think both organizations and companies that are focusing on tech, as well as colleges and universities that are accepting students who will be STEM professionals, that everyone needs to consider in this regard. And I think the hope from there is that this conversation was at least fruitful for the person who is interested and wants to see more diversity and inclusion in tech. So with that in mind, I thank you both for joining me in this conversation. I hope it won't be the last conversation that's had about this topic. Yes, until next time, thank you both. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Higher Ed Next and learning about the need for diversity in tech and STEM. For more information related to this discussion, please visit bestcolleges.com where you can find additional news and commentary. I'm Cobretti Williams. Until next time.